Over the years on this channel I've featured quite a few different music formats, and today we're going to take a look at two more. These are some of the more recent attempts to try and sell music in a physical format to the general public. It doesn't date back all that far, except I'd imagine most people probably never even noticed this happened. We're only going back to October 2008 when this first of the two products launched, and it came from a company you're probably familiar with, SanDisk, and the product we're talking about is slotMusic. slotMusic was an unusual idea. It was an attempt to sell a physical version of the MP3 album. So rather than download your MP3s, you'd go into a store, you'd buy one of these boxes which contained a 1GB micro SD card, on which was an MP3 album in either 256 or 320 kilobits per second. Now, at the time this was launched, all four major record labels in the US signed up to it. So that's Universal, Sony, Warner's and EMI, and a total of 40 titles were available at launch, and they were priced at $14.99 each, and these were sold at major retailers such as Walmart and Best Buy. So let's see what you got for your money. Right, so in front of me here are a total of 7 slotMusic albums. I bought these as a bundle on eBay a few years ago. I didn't pick the individual artists or albums, it was just how it came. I suppose these were the ones that they had left somewhere and someone was selling them off cheap, but I'll just show you what I've got. I need to make it clear though that I didn't pick them, because whenever I show something like, say, oh, Daughtry, people say, oh, you must really be into Daughtry. I'll be like, I've got no idea, mate. I can't even remember hearing anything from this artist or artists. I think it's a group, isn't it, by the looks of it? I thought it was the bloke out of The Who. That's a joke. So let's have a look. We've got Daughtry, we've got Swayze, I don't know. Chris Brown, yeah. Jimi Hendrix, Black Eyed Peas, Pussycat Dolls, and Robin Thicke. Now, one thing with this particular one, this was one of the ones they mentioned a lot in the promotion. It included some extra content. What does it say here? Features the hit singles Magic and the Sweetest Love, yeah. Contains exclusive bonus live videos, behind-the-scenes footage, photos and more. You see, because it's on a micro SD card, you can stick some other stuff on there. The idea with these is that you get the album, you get a bit of space, so you can put your own stuff on. But this is the only one in amongst this bunch that had anything like that, or at least it mentions it on the front. Maybe these others had stickers on the cellophane that have disappeared. These other ones say that, they've got certain songs on them, but nothing about extra content. But we'll have a look at this one in particular. The reason I'm looking at this one, though, it's sealed, so nobody's messed around in here, so everything that was originally in here will still be in. So let's see what we get. Okay, I'm not overly impressed with the packaging. Of course, when you buy music or anything that's a physical format, you want to keep the original packaging, or you tend to. Well, this seems very much like something that you'd be more expected to throw away. Coming from a company like SanDisk, they're used to making packaging for their micro SD cards that you'd chuck away once you got them out of the box. But this, it just seems a little bit flimsy. It's made out of cardboard. There's some plastic in here. I'll just show you. We've got the booklet, which would no doubt be the same one you get inside the CD box. Of course, the whole thing is the same size and shape as a CD jewel case, so no doubt would fit within the same retail space in a store. In here we've got the album art on a storage box. I'll show you that in a second, and then it explains how it works. You can use it on a MP3 player, a computer or a phone. Try it on your phone. Up to 320 kilobits a second, optimal sound quality. They also did them at 256k on some of them, I believe. The space is separated between the music and your space, which you can use on the SD card. It's just a normal SD card. The MP3 files don't have any DRM on them, so you can copy them across. You can wipe the card if you want, reuse it. Just a normal 1 gig card. So let's get inside this part of it. So this is, well, first off, we've got some devices for stores to use for their security there, which is taking up a large amount of the case. Over here we've got the storage case, the micro SD card and the USB SD card or micro SD card reader. To get into it, you have to first off break this section here, then that folds back and our SD card micro SD is fallen out there. So we'll just get everything out of here. So that's that and that's that. And yeah, I mean, it's not really, by the looks of it, designed to all go back in there again. I mean, this is the bit that held the micro SD card in there, so that just kind of falls off very easily. I don't think you're really supposed to look after this, but then again, if you want to put it all back, you've got to put these back in the individual slots. Yeah, not really the nicest packaging. So your micro SD card here, well, First off, there's no branding on there as far as the name of the album goes. It just says SM for slotMusic and microSD at the corner there. That's all the information you've got on there as far as I can see. There might be something printed. No, nothing on there. So to make sure you keep your slotMusic organised, you've got to put them back in these little boxes here. Now, these things are always a little bit pathetic because, as you can see, once you open them up, you tend to just drop your SD card out of them. Now, you wouldn't really want to be swapping your micro SD cards out on a bus or something and getting them out of these little cases, popping them back in again. That would be a nightmare. But remember, of course, this only contains one album. In some of the promotional literature of the time, SanDisk had suggested that this micro SD card to USB reader was worth $9.99. Of course, that seems a little bit overpriced. I'd imagine you wouldn't pay any more than half that, really. But if they're suggesting that's $9.99 and they're including it free in the set here, well, I suppose that means that the 1 gig card with the album on it is only worth $5. Yeah, and of course, every time you buy another one of these albums, you get another one of those USB readers as well. But we'll just put all that to one side because we want to play this SD card, micro SD card, in something. Rather than putting it straight into a computer, first of all, I wanted to put it into an MP3 player. Now, I needed an MP3 player with a micro SD card slot on it in a hurry, so I bought this from Amazon, got it next day delivery. So this is a 32 gigabyte brand new Clip Sport Go from SanDisk. I thought it'd be an appropriate thing to play it on. Right, so this is like a clip thing, pretty much the same as the devices that they were selling when they were selling these slotMusic cards. So I look around it and I'm like, hold on a minute, there's no micro SD card slot. So yeah, that shows you progress, doesn't it? SanDisk themselves are selling an MP3 player with 32 gig built in, but no micro SD card slot on it now. So that was a waste of time. And it was at this point that I remembered I do have this Astle and Kern MP3 player, which does have a micro SD card slot on the side. So we'll put the card in there and have a look at it. Okay, so if we just look on the SD card here, we can see we've got two folders, My Music and slotMusic Extras. If we go in the Extras, we can see there's nothing that's viewable on this particular device. We'd have to pop that into a computer to see what's in that folder. If we go back into the other folder, My Music, that's where the album resides. We've got 16 tracks here. If we just pick one of these at random, we get the album artwork at the top there again, which is pretty low resolution, but I suppose it would work fine on the little screens that were around at the time. And if we just go in the information here, we can see it's a 320 kilobits a second file, so that's the best quality that they offered on this format, which is totally fine. Of course, I can't play you anything from it other than about that amount, but yeah, it's an MP3 file, what do you expect? So let's take the card out, have a look at it in the computer. Okay, so we've got the two folders we've seen already and a text file. So having a look in there, it just reads, slotMusic is a registered trademark of Slot Media Group LLC. I didn't realise slotMusic had a capital M on music. I'll have to make sure I write it that way in the video description. So let's look in the extras. Album cover art, that's it, that's as much as you get. So that's at 600 by 600. And then if we go into the music folder, we've just got the tracks in there, and of course if we just look at one of those are the ones that have the rather kind of dodgy low-res art associated with each one. But yeah, that's it, that's all you get on that one, so not much in the way of extras. Let's put that Robin Thicke album in just to see what you did actually get in there. Now this is where we have to be extra careful because the Robin Thicke SD card looks exactly the same as the one with the Pussycat Dolls on it, so you got to watch you don't get those mixed up, put them back in their respective boxes. I suppose they could have printed some album art actually on the micro SD card, or at least printed the name of the artist, but that would have no doubt cost them more. I think they've done this to try and save as much money as possible. In fact, this one, the micro SD card reader doesn't even mention anything at all about slotMusic, but I noticed the one that came with the Robin Thicke album has a slotMusic logo on there. So no doubt they were constantly trying to just cut the price of this thing down, use stuff they already had in their stocks. But let's just have a look, see exactly what we get on this one here now. So we've got a portrait of Robin Thicke here, which is 4080 by 5317 pixels. So really quite a high resolution image there, if that's something you actually wanted in your collection. What's that one? Portrait 2. So these are from some session. In fact, when I look at it, they're going to be the photos that they used on the front of the album art there as well. And then there's another one that's a JPEG, which is a slightly lower resolution. So in here, let me just expand this out. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different videos, and they're each in 3 different formats. We've got .3GP, an MP4 and an AVI. And we'll just go to this first one with the 3GP. This will be the one that you would have viewed on your phone, on your little flip phone. So there's your little video for that. So yes, it's 176 by 144, and I think it's a low frame rate as well. You're 15 frames per second. And we pick another one, the next one down. This is a little bit better. This is an MP4 version of this live performance. And if I just look at the inspector on that one is 640 by 480, of course 30 frames a second. And then down here we've got a behind the scenes footage video that's just under 3 minutes in length, a bit of an interview and some green screen stuff. And then another interview down here which is another 2 minutes in length. So there you go, that's what extras you got on this particular card. I didn't look to see how much space is left on here, so there's 456.7 megs still available. Let's just have a look how much space there was on that Pussycat Dolls one. I forgot to do that before. We've got 862.1 megs available. So yeah, the vast majority of the card is available as your own space, with just the album taking up 100 and odd megs of that. Yeah, so there you go. That is a look at slotMusic. Now, with the passage of time, dates get a little bit foggy, so let me just go back and tell you exactly what the state of play was with regard to the MP3 market in October 2008 when slotMusic launched. So just going off the Apple iPod range, for 2 reasons. One, they were the market leader at the time, but also second, the dates are very well documented. So looking back at these, at the time of slotMusic's launch, Apple were up to the 6th gen iPod, the 4th gen iPod Nano, the 2nd generation iPod Shuffle, and the 2nd generation iPod Touch. Oh, and the iPhone 3GS was out. Of course, none of those devices had a micro SD card slot on them either, but as you can see, it was a very well established market. Now, when it came to buying music, buying your MP3s, well, of course, iTunes was there, but there were many other ways to get MP3s. Of course, I'm only talking about the above board ones here. I mean, when it comes to getting them for free, this thing doesn't even factor in it. But if you were interested in paying for your MP3s, well, I mean, you could rip a CD, for example, and that would often work out cheaper than the 40 titles that came out on this format. Most of these at $14.99 were a lot more expensive than a CD of the same album would have been at the time. And in fact, if you'd have looked on iTunes, most of these were available for $7.99 on there as downloads. Of course, factor in that you're getting a 1 gigabyte micro SD card here as well as your album, but it still remains the main question that was asked at the time of this product's launch was, why? Well, here's the answer to that question given by SanDisk's general manager at the time. He said, a large percentage of digital music owners don't load the players themselves and often rely on others to refresh their MP3s. You can't enjoy them without being comfortable with a computer and a credit card. He also goes on to say it takes time to load music players. When you buy an iPod, you have to take it home, charge it, and then sync it with iTunes. slotMusic allows consumers to access music as soon as they snag it off the shelf, provided they have a compatible device. And talking of devices, the press release stated that slotMusic has an unparalleled pre-existing installed base at launch, hundreds of millions of multimedia phones. Of course, SanDisk weren't just relying on others, they sold their own range of MP3 players. In fact, at the time of the launch of the slotMusic format, they were the #2 supplier of MP3 players in North America with a 10% market share. Oh, and if anyone didn't already have an MP3 player that could take slotMusic cards, SanDisk also started selling a new stripped-down model for just $20. And when it comes to the motivation behind launching a new physical music format in 2008, don't underestimate the involvement of the record labels here. After all the 4 majors signed up to this, and that shows you where they were at this point. They were still very much in the mindset of the idea of selling inventory off shelves. That's how the whole business had operated since the beginning. This whole movement over to MP3s and streaming was very difficult for them to get their heads around, but the idea of putting an MP3 on a card, sticking it in a box and selling it in a physical store, they can understand that. Now, I'm sure anyone watching this can think of a handful of reasons why slotMusic wouldn't have been a success. One in particular for me is just the fact that it's on these little micro SD cards. they're very fiddly to handle. Not the kind of thing you want to be swapping in and out on a regular basis. And on that point, pretty much any device I've ever had that's had a micro SD card slot on it, whether it's been a phone or an MP3 player or whatever, there's been something in the slot. I've already expanded the storage and it's got a large micro SD card in there. It's unlikely I'd be swapping it out for a 1GB card. I mean, say it was a phone and on that card in it you've got all your music and some videos and photos and whatever, and then you've got to take that out and put a 1GB card in it which has just got one album on it. It really doesn't make any sense. Now, in theory, if you did have a device and you didn't have anything in your micro SD card slot, you could buy one of these and therefore you've expanded your storage up to 1GB. But most people in 2008, I don't think, would have been shopping for 1GB cards. SanDisk at the time was selling micro SD cards all the way up to 16 gigs. Now, of course, the top end would have been very expensive. But I think most people, if they were expanding the storage, they'd be going for sort of a mid-ground, like a 4GB card, for example. And they'd have a 4GB card in the device already full of stuff, and they wouldn't want to be sticking one of these 1GB ones in its place. Needless to say, slotMusic came and went very quickly. I mean, it was launched in October 2008. It seems like they almost dropped it as soon as they launched it. They must have seen the writing on the wall, because initially they planned to launch, of course, many titles beyond the initial 40 and then launch it in Europe. Well, neither of those things ever happened. There was just the 40 initial titles that came out at launch, and that was it. For a lot of companies, a flop like that would have brought them down, but of course this is SanDisk, and you've got to bear in mind there's probably not an awful lot being spent on this. After all, we've got just different packaging, the kind of packaging that you might sell micro SD cards in anyway, bit of cardboard, bit of plastic. The micro SD cards weren't even printed up with album art, so they've just got the same printer that would print the normal size information on them. And really, I can't think that they spent very much on this at all. I mean, they'll have lost a bit of money. I don't know what the deal was with the record companies, how that side of things worked, you know, whether it's sale or return or whatever, but I think they probably just had a very small initial run. It didn't work out and they just dropped it, and it didn't really cost them very much money at all. After all, they're still around today and they probably don't even remember even launching slotMusic. However, the failure of this didn't stop them with this idea. They'd already forged these relationships with the record labels, so they moved on to something else, and that thing is called slotRadio. slotRadio came out on the 31st of March 2009, so less than 6 months after the launch of slotMusic, and this one is a lot more intriguing for me. So the idea of slotRadio was to sell MP3s on micro SDs. Yeah, it all sounds very familiar, but this time each micro SD card has 1,000 songs on it and costs $40. Now, they aren't just unknown tracks, they're popular hits. You could buy a slotRadio card for a variety of genres: rock, R&B and hip-hop, Motown, to name just a few. There were tie-ins with familiar names like Billboard and VH1, and the tracks on each card were divided into half a dozen or so playlists. Now, considering the fact that if you went on iTunes and you bought an individual track, it would have cost you 99 cents, and yet here you can get one of these slotRadio cards for $40 and it contains 1,000 songs, well, there's got to be some kind of catch there, right? Well, yeah, of course, there is. And you've also got to bear in mind the record labels are involved in this. They don't just want to give their music away, so there are going to be some restrictions here. I mean, the first thing is, of course, you haven't picked those individual tracks. You get what you're given. But the second one is, these aren't just normal MP3s that you can do with as you wish. You can't just copy them onto your computer. You've got to play them back through a special slotRadio compatible player. So the first one of these that was sold, not a bad little player really. SanDisk sold it for $100, and it came with a slotRadio mix card, and that contained 1,000 songs that covered a variety of genres handpicked from the Billboard charts. The player itself had a 1.5-inch OLED screen and an FM radio, and it had a nice little aluminium body with a clip on the back. Of course, this also functioned as a standard MP3 player. You could just swap in your own micro SD card full of your own MP3s, or even put in a slotMusic album if you've got any, but by this point that misstep was very much in SanDisk's rearview mirror. But they did follow up that first slotRadio player with some other models in the range that were able to play these files off the slotRadio cards. But also they did a range of cheaper, screenless, genre-centric players, and those come bundled with the appropriate 1,000-track music card. And you can see with these, they've just reused that simple MP3 player that was launched alongside slotMusic. Now, I've got one of those simpler slotRadio music players here. Now, this is a device that doesn't have any kind of display on it, and you might get to thinking then, well, how do you go about navigating yourself around 1,000 MP3s that are contained on a device with no screen? Well, you've got no need to worry about that, because this comes to the other big limitation. You can't just go and play a specific track. No, the slotRadio name is very apt, because you're not really in control of the music being played. Let me show you. Okay, so this is the Kiss FM branded player. One of those basic devices, no screen on this. We've got the micro SD card loaded in the bottom there. That's got 500 songs on it for this particular collection. Headphone output, volume up and down. And the controls on the side here, well, multi-purpose in a way. If you were to put a slotMusic card in here, those would be track, skip forward and back and play and pause. But when it comes to slotRadio, that's play, pause, that's change playlist, and that one is skip song. So let's plug some headphones into this, and I'll just give you a quick demo. Right, so I'll just turn it on now. You hold down this button here. It'll start playing as soon as it gets going.
Kiss faves.
I'll just pause it. And you'll have heard a voice there announce the playlist. As you go through each playlist, as you skip between them, it tells you which one you're in. Gives you some kind of idea as to the theme of the music you're going to be listening to. And of course then, when you skip forward a track, it skips within that playlist. So there's no shuffle option in here. The playlists follow a strict path from one song to the other. It's just there's going to be like 100 odd songs in each playlist, so you just have to keep pressing forward if you wanted to get back round to one you like, but it's not designed to be used like that. So let me go through the playlist here. Some of them have less descriptive names than others. I don't know what some of them are supposed to mean. I suppose it would say on the back of the box, but just have a listen.
Summertime. Breakup makeup. Wedding. Club deviate. Jingle ball. Wango tango. Kiss faves. Summertime.
Okay, so we've got back round to the beginning again. I don't know what Wango Tango or Jingle Ball are. Maybe those are well-known genres that I missed out on. But one nice thing with this is it keeps track of where it is in each playlist. So if you move playlist, whatever song was playing last time, it will resume at that point. So I know at the moment, in the Club Deviate, it's Lisa Cult Jam, I Wonder If I Take You Home. And in one of the other ones, I think it might be Faves or something, it's LL Cool J. So let's just have a listen to see if I'm proved right, if it's remembered. So, need to skip playlist.
Breakup makeup. Wedding. Club deviate.
There you go.
Jingle ball. Wango tango. Kiss faves.
So overall, works well, I think. Nice little thing. Oh, and I didn't mention, this thing runs off one AAA battery which powers it for 13 hours. I'm not sure of the original retail price of these slotRadio to go bundles. I know the original slotRadio player came down to $79.99 with the radio mix card, and these little MP3 players on their own were being sold for $20. And the slotRadio cards for Motown, for example, those contained 500 songs, the same as this Kiss one, and those were being sold for $30. So if you imagine $30 plus $20 for the player, you're up to $50. I suspect there was a bit of a discount for buying both together. So I'd imagine this is more like a $40 device. But in 2010, Amazon apparently was selling them off for $25 and then reduced that down to $20. There are no doubt some people wondering what the contents of a slotRadio card look like when viewed on a computer, so this is for them, and as expected, all the music files have been hidden away, and this is how it looks with the Show Hidden Files option switched on in the file browser. The card capacity shown just relates to the space that's left, which according to the literature here was provided for the user to add one album of their own. But there you go, there's nothing really to see here, so let's move on. Now, it's important to mention none of the slotRadio compatible players would allow you to go back a track, just forwards. Now, if you put your own MP3s in, of course, you could skip back and forth, but just those slotRadio cards, as soon as you put one of those in, one of these things, one of those things, or one of the compatible Sansa players, you could only skip forward through the tracks. And I think that was all part of the negotiation between SanDisk and the record labels to get the prices down so they could fit 1,000 tracks on a card and sell it for just $40. Having individual direct access to specific tracks must have been the thing that would have driven up the price. A bit of a weird negotiation, but it worked out. That, and of course the DRM, which meant you couldn't take the MP3s off and use them anywhere else. Now, as a result of these limitations at the time when it came out, the reviews were really quite negative. But I can see why they did what they did. It was the only way to get this deal to work. The fact you don't have a back button, all right, I can live with that. In fact, I'll be honest, looking at those reviews now, they were all really quite down on this, but now with the benefit of hindsight, I actually quite like this. I think I better explain why. Now, the way we interact with music differs from person to person, so I can see why a lot of people wouldn't like the idea of a device that just plays a random track to you. But for me, it really does appeal, and it goes back to the way I've always listened to music, right back to the beginning. When I was buying cassettes, for example, in the HMV sales, I'd pick up a load of really cheap, like $1.99 cassettes that were compilations or film soundtracks, just to find out what was on them. Occasionally I'd come across something that I was unaware of completely, but really enjoyed. It's that music discovery aspect of it. I mean, if we say just go back to watching these videos, that Cuba Bion track I found on a Techmoan cartridge, I didn't know it was there when I got the Techmoan cartridge, never heard of the track before. It's become a part and parcel of the channel, and it's something that will probably carry on long after I've gone. It's that kind of thing. I mean, I always used to get CDs with compilations on them because I like discovering these new tracks. If you don't know the name of an artist or the name of a track, how do you ever know to search for it? How are you ever going to find it? And you're not going to get it on the radio. The radio's playing quizzes and adverts, and occasionally they'll play a bit of music every now and then between the DJ doing stupid nonsense, and then it's a track you've heard a million times before. You don't get that music discovery through the radio. So something like this, perfect for me. I mean, I've only listened to this perhaps for an hour or so. Out of all the tracks I've heard during that time, about half of them I'd say I recognised, and most of those I liked, and then the other half I didn't know at all, and I don't know if that's because they were more obscure or just because I missed out on them at the time, but quite a few of those I liked as well. Now, there's a bit of a problem. If you're using this for music discovery, I don't know what the name of that track is that's played. There's no way to find out without, of course, sending it off to some kind of music recognition thing like Shazam or whatever. So you'd have to be listening going, oh, I like this, halfway through, pause it, plug it into some speakers or something, Shazam it. Awkward. Of course, if you get one of the devices with a screen on it, when the track's playing, it'll tell you the name of the track and the artist, so it'd be a bit more useful that way. In fact, I've even gone as far as ordering a device that will play these slotRadio cards with a screen on it, but that hasn't arrived yet, just because I want to work my way through this and see if there's anything on here that I want to listen to more of. And of course, most of it is getting on now. I mean, we're talking about 2009 as the newest stuff, but most of the stuff on this dates from quite a bit before then. So yeah, hopefully on here, amongst these 500 tracks, there's going to be quite a few things that I'm going to want to listen to again in the future, and that might take me down some kind of road of discovery into finding new artists that I was previously unaware of. So for me, I love this idea. But back in 2009, the idea of buying something with 1,000 tracks on that weren't listed, you don't know what those tracks are, it's just going to play them in some kind of order that it feels like, didn't really appeal to many people. Then again, when you think of what you do nowadays, a lot of people are used to listening to streaming music, and they'll go through playlists that are being curated by various DJs or within certain genres or themes, and you don't know what those tracks are in there, and it's pretty unlikely that you're going to pick individual ones out. You just get it to play the playlist in the background and let it work its way through, just like one of these things. Or to get something that's even more similar, what about your smart speaker device? If you've got one of those, and you say, hey Gulek Siri, play something funky, and it's just going to play a track, and you might not like that track, and you might say skip, and it'll go to the next one. You won't say play that one again. It's pretty unlikely. You're just going to listen to what it plays in whatever order it decides, and you might skip forward the odd time if you don't like a particular track. I mean, that's what this is. So the idea, really not that far from what people have really got used to nowadays. Now, I don't think you'd call slotRadio a success, but it did seem to last longer and perhaps sell more than slotMusic did, although that wouldn't be hard to do. It did remain on the market really until 2012. That's when it was officially discontinued in March 2012. But for those last 2 years, there hadn't been any new releases. The last one came out in 2010, April 2010. That was a 500-track Motown card. And really, if you look at the total number of compilations released, it was around about a dozen or so, just over. So not too many different cards came out, but you've got to bear in mind they either contained 500 or 1,000 tracks, and nowadays if you look at what the prices they fetch on the second-hand market, it's way up there if you can find these things. Now I'm not too sure what that's about, whether it's just some collector's market trying to get all of them, or whether people actually do like listening to these things, getting 1,000 tracks that they haven't individually picked. Because if you ask me to pick 1,000 tracks by different artists to put on a micro SD card, I would really struggle. However, if you gave me 1,000 tracks, that's a lot easier. I could just enjoy what someone else has picked for me. It's just an idea that was maybe a little bit out of its time and perhaps wasn't best suited to a physical medium rather than something that you get over a streaming service. But I hope you've enjoyed having a look at both slotMusic and slotRadio here today. But that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.